right, looks like we're live now. We're going to give folks just a few minutes to jump in. We see people joining right now. So, welcome this afternoon to the FedRAMP 20x Demystified or Explained webinar here, presented by InfusionPoints, also Fortreum and AWS. How about we poll the audience a little bit? The question that we have is the comfort level that you have with FedRAMP 20x. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you don't mind, drop it in the chat. What is your comfort level? Being 1, hey, what is FedRAMP 20x? Never heard of it. And 10 being, we got this. Go ahead and drop your answer in the chat now. We've got the producer that'll be taking a look at those. Just want to kind of poll the audience and see where we're at here. And again, we'll give folks just a few more minutes to join in and we'll get cranking. See some numbers coming in there. We're got a little bit of a shotgun pattern going, but I see we're starting to narrow it in a little bit. All right. We got about 1 more minute. We're 2 past. We want to go ahead and get things started. Want to be very cognizant of time. Number one, we appreciate all y'all joining today and taking time to join us here for this FedRAMP 20x Explained webinar. And our goal here today is simple. We're not looking to sell you anything. We're looking to educate and help you understand exactly what FedRAMP 20x is, and talk a little bit about what's changed, why it matters, and then what you can do about it right now. So we're hoping we're going to have some organizations that are in here today looking for some answers. If you're looking to be sold something, I'm sorry, you're not going to find that here today. We're solely here to educate. Here at InfusionPoints, we're leading with the motto of see one, do one, teach one. And so we've been successful in our 20x journey thus far, and now we're looking to share some of that knowledge with you folks. So again, thank you for joining today. Very briefly, we're going to go through some introductions today as we move through. And so my name is Chad Spears. I'm the CISO here at InfusionPoints, and my co-host over here is Mr. Tanner Bailey. Tanner, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And then from Fortreum, we have the principal consultant, Mr. Ethan Troy. Ethan, thank you so much for joining.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And then from AWS, we have the security partner strategist, Miss Michelle Peterson. Michelle, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. So as we get going, we're going to dive right in. Want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get too far in. If you have questions, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. We will have time for Q&A at the end, but our producer will field those, and we'll try to ensure that we get to those in a timely fashion. And so as we dive into this FedRAMP 20x, the first thing we want to talk about is why FedRAMP 20x. And so, Mr. Tanner Bailey, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining us. When you get into the FedRAMP space, the key thing to always remember is this is a business driver. It's not just security. It's not just compliance. It's about making money. That's why we're all here. It's why we're hosting the webinar. It's why you guys are joining. You want to learn about how your business can make money. So 20x, as I'm sure most of you already know, is a fundamental shift in how FedRAMP is going to go through managing the certification packages, which that's a term change we'll get into later. And, it's not called authorization anymore. It's called certification. A little bit of a spoiler alert. But the long and short of it is that FedRAMP just got too difficult to maintain. It got too difficult to get into. It was too difficult for agencies to maintain their continuous monitoring requirements. Assessments became unsustainable. They became too expensive. And FedRAMP is law. So those contradict each other. FedRAMP is law. So federal agencies have to leverage FedRAMP authorized services. But it was too difficult for the industry and for the providers out there to get into the space or to maintain their compliance within the space. And long and short of it, a change had to happen. So these drivers like speed to market, innovation that we've got listed here on the slide, those were the keys. Like I already talked about, Rev 5 is not sustainable. So something had to give. And the idea that the PMO has been pushing is they want to make it easier to get in, but also easier to maintain your FedRAMP certification and all of the various compliance requirements behind it. But on top of all that, one thing that we do not want to have as a misconception for the audience coming away from this is that it is any less secure. The PMO has been very clear that they want it to remain as secure, if not more secure, with a lot of the visibility improvements that have come about with 20x when compared to FedRAMP Rev 5. But they also want it to be easier and more business applicable to your environment. Chad, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I love how you tied that in with the fact that at the end of the day, FedRAMP didn't necessarily want to change.
Mhm.
It changed because it had to, and the fact that you're pulling that in and tying it in with business aspect of it is exactly right. Right. Uh, the time to market was taking too long. Cost of entry was creeping on up there as we've seen. And at the end of the day, those things combined was causing innovation to get blocked, as you mentioned. Meanwhile, all of this is happening, but agencies still needed a solution. Agencies were still begging for, "Hey, I need a better way to manage all of these ATOs," old lingo,
Mhm.
right? But all these ATOs, I need a better way. I need a better way. And so what you ended up with was a mismatch there, and the market was moving fast, but the authorization process possibly just wasn't keeping up.
Yeah.
And so FedRAMP then came out with 20x, and that is hopefully the correction to this problem. We believe so here at InfusionPoints, and we've seen some great things coming from that. So
Yep.
yeah, exactly right. Anything else on that, Tanner?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Love it. All right. So as we move on to the next slide here, moving from Rev 5 to 20x. So this fundamental shift, Tanner, talk to us a little bit about that fundamental shift. And I know we're going to kind of get even in some of the nitty gritty here. And for our audience, before we dive into this, these are some of the areas I want to highlight. These are some of the areas from an educational stance that you definitely might want to take note of. So go ahead, Tanner.
Yeah. So, in order to really understand how it is so different, the first thing you need to understand is the difference between your security controls and the key security indicators. So, if I'm ever throwing around the acronym KSIs, that's what I'm referring to as the key security indicators. So, FedRAMP Rev 5 path, you have NIST 853 was the baseline that FedRAMP based their control baselines off of, and then added FedRAMP specific parameters. So you had low, moderate, high baseline for Rev 5. But now what the PMO has done is they've come out with key security indicators. And it's kind of like the cousins to the security controls, if I had to describe it,
Yeah.
where it's, they're very similar. You still have, you have an AT security control family in Rev 5, which is security training. And then you have the CED KSI family, which is your cybersecurity education. So they cover a lot of the same tenets when it comes to security best practice, but there's again a fundamental shift in the way that you're proving your compliance with the KSIs versus how you're proving your compliance with security controls. Your training requirements is a great example of that. In the AT security control family or the Rev 5, you're saying, are you doing security training? Are you doing role based security training? Do you do developer based or developer specific security training? Whereas the KSIs follow that same path, but they also want for CSPs to prove how are you measuring the effectiveness of your training
Yeah.
requirements. So you're not just saying I'm doing training and then I'm doing remedial training if somebody it breaks compliance requirements.
Right.
But now it's saying how much value am I as a business getting out of my security training programs? How much have phishing tests internally? How much has the successfulness gone down? That's an
Yeah.
example of how you can measure that KSI.
Yeah.
And that is a great example of this second bullet here. I really want folks in the audience to key in on this. That compliance is now meant to suit your processes, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Again, you're not able to just say, "Hey, I'm not going to do access control." That's not what I'm saying here. If my business says I shouldn't do access control, I'm not going to do access control.
But that's a fundamental problem.
Yeah, that's a fundamental security problem. But what it's saying is instead of having to go and, take a process that you don't really need, you genuinely have mitigating security controls around it, or your security situation is not applicable to that control, then you don't have to do it. And that's how the KSIs are designed. There's less of that scrutiny on non-applicable controls. If you
Right.
have a good story, it's not a black mark on your resume if you've
Right.
got 15% non-applicable controls because you don't have a complex environment, or that entire side of your application is just those security controls don't apply.
Yeah.
So that's been awesome.
Yeah.
And we've seen that now that persistent review, there's a lot of automated evidence gathering has been the other major tenet beyond the how do you say that you're meeting the KSIs. What you're showing and how you're displaying that to the public or to your agency sponsor is very important now. So, I really wanted to, open the floor, Ethan, for you to talk about, from an assessment perspective, how you've seen CSPs handle that requirement for sharing evidence consistently, and how that's, changed your job, and how Fortreum does things as a 3PAO.
Yeah, for changing evidence, I did want to just touch on one thing you did say that
Yeah.
even though the KSIs have made it more flexible for certain people, it actually also opens up the door the other way. So if you want to actually show that you're doing more than the standard, that
Mm-hmm.
it's now a bucket or a vehicle to express that you're doing more. And I think that's what's really cool about this process is that if you want to really get competitive and show that you're better than other services, you can really do that, and you can present that into the marketplace. And the KSIs afford that sort of flexibility. That there are some musts and there are some
Sure.
shoulds there, and so I just want anybody to to assume that because it's we were walking like this slippery slope of people assuming that there might be a lower level of security, but that's not the truth. It's just being presented a different way. And the biggest thing that I hear a lot is that, well, there's less KSIs than there were Rev 5 controls, but you guys know we did the assessment for your platform. Even though you have a KSI for, say, the education one, you check like 5 or 6 different things within
Right.
that bucket, right?
Yep.
So the same thing with the other ones. Someone might check 3 things, you guys might check 8 things. So it's really flexible in that way.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms
Can I
of
jump in
yeah,
right there, Ethan? Because I think that's a
yeah.
very important thing, and for our audience, right? We're about educating here. Let's touch on that a little bit. So you now have these KSI families, right? But you just mentioned, Ethan, that hey, you guys may check 3 or 4 things, and somebody else may check
Mhm.
2 things, right? Um, i- we at InfusionPoints and even within FedRAMP, within the KSI families, they're known as validations, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about, Ethan, right? If you have more that you want to present to show how you're meeting said KSI, that affords you the opportunity to do that within those validations. So I think that's very important to show
Yeah.
and to help our audience understand that you can bring in some of those things. And I think what's really important as well is there are uh, there's an aspect of this where you get to measure, is this important to my business, right? So if this KSI or this validation is important to my business and important to the security of my business for whatever reason, we can now pull that validation in and show that data. So it's very important. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then to Tanner's question about, how we're assessing this stuff, how are we looking at things? Well, we're not taking a screenshot once a year and saying and using that as the evidence that you have encrypted something, right? So we're actually evaluating, have you built the automation? And usually that's something in like Python. And is it true? Is it really going to check out all the buckets that are there? Am I just seeing one bucket, or is it all 199 of them? And is the
Right.
information coming back the right way? So that's kind of been, my job in this process is to evaluate that whatever automation has been built is actually true and is presenting that information. And it's presenting that information not just one day out of 365 days a year, but as many times as you want. So some products pull information every day, some products pull information every 5 seconds. I know you guys built a product where you can just push a button and run the automation anytime somebody wants. So it's really up to the customer. And again, it goes back to building this competitive marketplace, because if I want to buy a service and you can tell me security compliance information at the push of a button, I think that's pretty cool that I can get that information right away instead of waiting a whole year or going off
Hmm.
of an assessment that was done 6 months or a year ago. Um, so yeah, that's
Yeah.
been the process, with you guys
Yeah.
and with our other customers. Yeah.
So Ethan, do you feel like that's required you as the assessor to be more technical minded, right, and engineer minded as you're reviewing these processes and these checks or these validations?
Yes, of course. I've been kind of pushing this sort of thing for even like 5 years ago, and said that a lot of this stuff could be automated. All
Hmm.
the major clouds, Azure, AWS, which I'm at AWS today, GCP, all the major clouds had the ability to pull this information programmatically. Even most of your cloud services out there, like Okta, they have APIs that you can pull this information programmatically. We just kind of had to connect the dots. So I was really
Right.
happy when FedRAMP 20x came about, because it was like, okay, let's not take 1,000 screenshots and then let's do this a different way where we kind of engineer the solution. It's been very fun actually evaluating these products and working with companies like you and some other clients that we have, and the different creative ways they've come up with how to express their security, and to Tanner's point, just express good business practices, because good business is good security, and vice versa.
Right. Yeah, and to touch on that real briefly as well, I would be missed if I didn't say this. Uh, Here at Infusion Points, we were so excited to see FedRAMP 20x come out, and I say this all the time because we've been trying to 20x for a long time. Because going back to that screenshot, the mundane piece of that, right? Being involved in all these audits, we kept on telling ourselves like, man, this can be automated. I could even automate the screenshot, or I could just run some code here that would pull the exact same data. So we were so excited to see that come. But I think this is a great segue as well to Michelle, over to you. Ethan hit on something there that's very important. Look, you can take screenshots all day long, and you can run code all day long. However, you have to be ensure that you're pulling that data from a source of truth. And so I know for us, within AWS, being an AWS Premier Partner, we're leveraging a lot of the native cloud tooling within AWS as that source of truth. So talk to us just a little bit about that, Michelle, that source of truth and what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just going back to even before that, looking at, you as a customer making those decisions, right? So, at AWS, that's a huge piece. And for organizations that are either starting their cloud journey, right, or already operating in a cloud, it's really understanding the shared responsibility model and benefiting from that build once and inherit consistently. So, and that approach to the security controls. So I think that's the fundamentals to it. And then also looking at, the reduction of costs and engineering effort, right? And using what AWS has pre-built compliance infrastructure rather than, building it yourself. And really that comes down to where AWS has mapped a lot of the native services to FedRAMP 20X's, 4 core pillars, which really will help folks understand those compliance implementation. And so I'd like to highlight just a couple of those, and going back to kind of
Yeah.
that, similar to what InfusionPoints has done when they did this. So,
Yeah.
just looking at just the trust pillar, for example. So that's where like AWS config can come in and really help consolidate those security findings from across the entire environment. So it's really a unified view of that security posture. And over time, and the Cloud Trail, for example, will give you the account and service level API auditing, really creating that audit trail necessary for that continuous compliance. So again, it's not a one and done, but really a continuous workflow there. Um, Another pillar, and again, these are all just some examples here, just a few services, not everything by any means, but just some things to think about here. But from like the VDR, the vulnerability detection and response, right? You've got Amazon Guard Duty, which offers that intelligence threat detection that's aligned to your runtime environments and continuous monitoring for that malicious activity. Also can think about AWS Lambda, enabling automated remediation functions, allowing you to respond to those threats in real time without manual intervention. And I think that's a big piece to all of this, is moving away from that manual piece to more of an automation.
Right.
Going to, Tanner talking about the key security indicators, or that KSI generation for that pillar within FedRAMP 20X, is identity and access management, or IAM. And so, it's not a negotiable. It needs to be done. It's really providing that robust authentication and authorization capabilities for you, making sure that only those that are authorized have access to those resources, and really considering, that principle of least privilege. The last little bit there for the pillars would be that significant change notification. So utilizing AWS config, and we can talk about this a little bit more too, and Event Bridge, and how they work together to detect and route configuration changes, so that you're making sure that you're maintaining that visibility, seeing what's happening, and that control over your environment as it evolves, instead of again going back to, hey, we did it here this one time, and now we'll just not worry about it. I think those are key services to just consider and think through when looking at the different pillars, and really looking at AWS as a source of truth for integrating, and then what you're responsible for. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another, thing that's really powerful about these services that I want to highlight is also that API first capabilities. That's what they're designed with. So it's really, again, going back to that automation and integration into your existing workflows. So it's not rebuilding. Um, and utilizing those evidence pipelines to continuously validate that compliance, and point in time assessments rather than relying on that like, hey, let's go check it now and see what's happening. Rather, you're doing this over time, instead of just once a time.
Yeah. Now, Michelle, I love everything you just stated was music to my ears because these are all services that I know that we have taken advantage of. And we've even pointed our customers and anybody we talk to, right? We're here to educate. Leverage these native services. There's so much power in it. And what I really love with the security background,
Mhm.
SecOps background here, right? What I really love about it, Tanner, is that nothing can be swept under the rug. Nothing can hide in the
Yep.
cracks, right? If you're leveraging AWS config and you've got it enabled across all accounts, you're able to get that full picture, right? And so it really leads with security first. But another
Mhm.
thing that I'm hearing here, and I'd like to kind of pull the team here, what I'm hearing is that security didn't get easier, right? You still have to have these things engineered. You have to have a platform that's running these things, and these things are enabled. What did change with 20x is proving it, right? The ability to prove it with automation, but also could prove it continuously. All of that changed completely. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think there's one aspect of this that folks need to remember is that the agencies still have that expectation from the Rev 5 history and from the FISMA history of that security. Just because FedRAMP comes and slaps a new pretty shiny new coat of paint from a 20x perspective, where you're able to see things more easily, all that background work still has to be done, and the agencies are still going to be expecting those tenets of security, even if you have like a good story around the KSIs. The agency expectations will still need to be met. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's in order to they're your customer, so customer expectations still have to be met. But yeah, from a security perspective, I think that's something important to remember from an agency perspective. But from a security perspective, it's not the last month before an assessment where where you notice something, you're like, oh, I gotta fix this before I give this screenshot to the assessor. It's that's good for security. Don't get me wrong, it's better
Sure.
than nothing.
Sure.
But it's better to say, oh, I got an alert in my 20x Trust Center KSI dashboard, and that's automatically been triaged into a ticket that's now alerting my team that's responsible for that asset to get it taken care of. And then the next day or the next week, I log on and I say, "Oh, nice! It's a green checkbox now. That means that they took care of that failure that happened last week."
I love it.
So yeah, peace of
I
mind
think
is awesome.
I think what's cool about that is that you can now show trust and assurance over time rather
Oh yeah.
than
Hmm.
point in time. So when you're again going back to the business case for this is when you're selling a product, then you can show that you're actually doing those activities 365 days of the year. That's really powerful. I think
Yes.
what's cool about this is that for the longest time, it was hard to sort of quantify the value of security teams. The value is only quantified when a breach happens, and then in comparison, you can compare. Oh well, glad that didn't happen. Glad our teams were doing what they needed to do, and
Yeah.
that's why things like pen tests and red team are valuable because they show the value of security through honestly offensive security, right?
Right.
So because people see those things and then it hits the report and then they're like, oh crap, yeah, we need to go, we need to make sure that we're doing that. So you guys come from SecOps background, so you kind of understand all that as well.
Sure.
But this process is really trying to get to the point where you can show that all the security things that you should be doing, you are doing and can
Right.
quantify it and actually make it valuable to the business because if you don't have MFA on, no one knows until you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ethan, I love that, right? The business case, it allows us as the security engineers or SecOps folks, or whatever level we're at, number one, to keep a pulse on the environment the entire time. But also, it allows from the business case to report that up in that historical manner, like you were talking about, Ethan. and show how our application or the customer's applications, you folks that are joining us today, how your application stays
Mm.
secure not only one time a year, but
All
continuously.
right.
And that's going to be powerful taking that to agencies.
And another thing I just want to pull on that for years for assessments, we would always, ask this, hey, show me that line item for your security team, how much you're spending, and we,
Yeah,
take screenshots of that stuff. This process is really to fortify that line item so
yep,
that you can show to the rest of the business, why am I even paying for this stuff? Is it even
yes,
working? Is it even
yes,
on? And I know for business owners and for, people that are running their organizations, it's really hard to go to your business and say, "Hey, I need a new SIM. I need
sure.
a new tool. I need this new thing." And now this process is really for that. This process
Hmm.
is to, again, quantify the great work that the security teams are doing and actually show the value in it 365 days a year or every 5 seconds if you want.
That's right.
And to get away from the documentation heavy workflows, which
Mm.
honestly, I no one gets hacked because you had a misspelling in your SSP. Just be honest.
It's true.
Nothing's going to happen if your policies and procedures were written in the wrong font or had different headers or colors.
Right,
That stuff, that glorified fact check security is not what we need. We need to
right,
get back to what this whole process is about, is expressing the security work that these security teams are doing and giving assurance to their end users who will be, government agencies, so they can use those products. And that's it.
right. Love it. I love it. That's a great segue into our next section, actually, talking about proving that and how this 20x is growing with that continuous validation. So as we shift, Tanner, take us through this slide here, and let's talk about where 20x is right now today, because for those of you that are still educating yourself, 20x is live. There are authorizations or certifications, certified applications out there, and we're proud to be one of them. So we're already there with 20x, but where's the program at today, Tanner, and where's it going?
Yeah, so this slide will talk about kind of the history of the last year of FedRAMP 20x. It's about a year and about 10 days old, if I remember correctly. Last week was the 1 year anniversary. So I'll keep it brief here, but FedRAMP 20x launched with a pilot last year for phase one. So they're breaking it down into three phases. First phase being corresponding with low baseline, two corresponding with moderate, and then three with high next year. So again, phase one opened up last year and concluded in beginning of Q3 of 25. And it introduced basically the first batch of those pilot authorizations. So it gave the PMO the opportunity to test their metal as far as like what they've designed
Hmm.
for these KSIs, as a first batch of low KSIs, test that baseline, test what works, what doesn't, really get some the industry, forward, leaders, people that were willing to experiment like us and
Sure.
get in on the ground and hit the ground running. The opportunity to like test and actually give our interpretation on the KSIs. There's more interpretation here than there was with the security controls. So
Right.
we joked that every time we read them for like first half dozen times we read them differently, or we had different ideas or new ideas. So
Yeah.
that was a phase one pilot. That was back in, again, that closed in July of 25. Phase two kicked off late last year. I want to say it was in late October, early November when
Mhm.
phase two kicked off. It was the introduction of the moderate KSI baseline. Initially, it was the alpha. The beta was released about 6 weeks ago. And that concluded just recently, just at the end of March, or excuse me, early March. The submissions were due for the second cohort. They split phase two into two cohorts,
Mhm.
and 13 total CSPs participated, us being one of those. And those CSPs actually went through a assessment process in both of the cohorts. So Ethan, it was a pleasure working with you on our assessments through both cohorts, and getting those KSI validation automation checks assessed by you for comprehensiveness, understanding. Well, we also helped set up our trust center, which was that public
Right.
facing view that has a private view for agencies or for customer stakeholders to sign in and actually see what evidence is being gathered. And then the last bucket here on the left hand side of the slide is there's other releases that have come out. So balance improvement releases, is FedRAMP's goal is to take the transition between Rev 5 and 20x and make it as smooth as possible through the balance improvements. So we've talked about significant change notification. Michelle, you mentioned vulnerability detection and response. FedRAMP has introduced fundamental, like, ground level changes to your POAM process. It's not there, you don't do POAMs anymore. You have a vulnerability detection and response dashboard. You're triaging findings and scan results completely differently than in 20x than you did inside of Rev 5. And the goal with the balance improvement is to offer Rev 5 CSPs the opportunity to start transitioning some of their processes to 20x through wide release. So, there was a beta process for many of these. Most of them are in wide release, or approaching wide release at this point. But a great example of that would be like significant change notifications. We all know significant change assessments are kind of a pain in a lot of ways. If you're not familiar with them, if you introduce a change to your FedRAMP authorized system that falls into the category of a significant change, there's a whole process to define that. Then you have to get that change assessed before you can implement it live inside of your environment. And that's only possible through a significant change assessment. So you reconfigure your 3PIO, or do your significant change as a part of your annual audit cycle, and then get that implemented. But what FedRAMP has introduced is they're trying to lessen the burden of that by doing significant change notifications. And the idea here is they still want to give the agencies the warm fuzzies that security is being followed, and give them a heads up that something big is coming that they still have to sign off on, which was part of the significant change assessment process. But now you can do that through a notification process, and only in very particular edge cases do you have to go through a full assessment. There's still an assessment framework for those major changes that do have, the old
Yeah,
school significant change impact.
I was
Yeah,
gonna add
Ethan.
to this. I was gonna add to this that, yeah, for a long time we did SERs for things that did not make sense to do SERs on. If
Right.
you're upgrading a server from year 2019 to 2020, like, it's just a server upgrade, or if you're upgrading a package, then you don't have to do a full-blown assessment again. So that's really
Yeah.
for those minor changes that you should be doing anyway. So you don't have to do a full assessment. It would just cause a lot of turmoil for some orgs, because they'd have to wait for the whole cycle, get it scheduled, and
Yep.
sometimes that would even make you vulnerable, right? Because I need to go upgrade to this server because the one I'm on is vulnerable, but I have to go do a whole SDR assessment, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
it's really to get out of that stuff, yeah.
yeah. So let me jump in here real quickly, because I want to make sure that our audience on here, right? You're here to learn about 20x. You're here to educate yourself. I'm hoping that you're here to say, hey, is this the right move for my business? And so I want to try to put a bow on this right here. And what I'm hearing is that number one, 20x is not theoretical anymore.
Yeah.
Right. 20x is it's in practice, right? We have the low, we're already there. Have already submitted for the moderate. And so what this means for you, the business out there, is that number one, you're not too early. But if you wait, you could be too late, right? And so now's the time to get engaged. Now's the time to start educating yourself, and now's the time to learn. So
Yep.
I think that's a great segue into our next section here, where we're going to be talking about kind of the road ahead and what that looks like. So Tanner, talk to us about the road ahead briefly, because I want to make sure that we get to some of the things that we've got for our audience out there.
Yeah. So, road ahead, just want to introduce a couple of terms and some dates that the audience needs to be familiar with. So on the left side, Consolidated Rules 2026 comes out. Some folks in the audience might be a little overwhelmed because there's a lot of terms, a lot of dates, a lot of ideas that we've been throwing out. And the goal with Consolidated Rules, or CR 2026, is that they're getting everything into one source of truth, they being the FedRAMP PMO. The goal release date for CR 2026 is end of June 2026. And then those requirements will begin being applicable to CSPs as soon as they're released. They're going to have a grace period at first release for about 6 months. So corrective actions will begin for existing certified CSPs on the new year, 2027. And with this, they're trying to introduce an annual update cycle. So any other major or minor releases to FedRAMP requirements, they can release as a part of an annual process. So, CR 2027 will introduce the next set of requirements, et cetera, et cetera. The middle section, don't want to dive into that too far. That's what we talked about earlier with balance improvements. The balance improvements are basically to help CSPs that are already Rev 5 authorized or already far along the path to transition to Rev or to 20x without as much operational churn and make some of the Rev 5 life easier while they're performing that transition.
Yeah.
And then Rev 5, or as the audience probably noticed, that we haven't talked about high as far as high KSIs or a high baseline. It's because the high pilot is scheduled for FY27 of Q1/Q2.
Awesome.
And then there'll be additional conversation about agency adoption and all that jazz. So,
Awesome.
but yeah, definitely want to get on to the
I love it. Yeah.
rest of our.
So again, right now, here's your timeline, right? You have a window right now to start preparing for it. You're not behind the 8 ball, but you can definitely get ahead of some things. So, how is it that we and these folks here start preparing, right? And so let's talk about, briefly some of the misconceptions that are out there, because that's the whole reason that we're having this webinar. Is we felt that there just needed to be some demystifying, if you will. There may have been a little bit of smoke that was being blown out there, and we wanted to ensure that we could cut through that. And so when it comes to some of these misconceptions, Tanner, be interested. I can give my perspective. I'll throw a few of them in there, but what are some of the misconceptions that you've seen along the way, and then we'll maybe see what Ethan's perspective was on this.
Yeah, I think for me it was the some of the mindset shift that I had to do was specifically around like the traditional boundary. The misconception was that, if it wasn't part of the Rev 5 FedRAMP boundary, the big red line on your boundary diagram, then it wasn't in scope for 20x. But if you take that to its logical conclusion, you think about things like code analysis, your SDLC processes. That's outside of most CSPs boundary, but that's extremely important. You don't want to introduce like known exploited vulnerabilities into your application because it wasn't caught in your SDLC process. So I think getting away from that for me, as far as the amount of scrutiny that FedRAMP was going to put on outside of your traditional boundary security controls. Once I got my mind wrapped around it, I realized the value that it was adding for things like, I remember in one of our workshops, Pete Waterman, director of FedRAMP, mentioned, hey, I want to see if you're an AWS customer, then your credit card that you're paying for all your AWS services, if that expires and then all your AWS services go down, you're going to be in a bad way security wise because of all the ways that you're leveraging those cloud native tools. But, that's never going to get checked in a Rev 5 assessment because that credit card has nothing to do with your FedRAMP authorization boundary. So, I think that was great for me. That was like a misconception / misunderstanding of how to think about the KSIs for me. I was like, I got to think more outside of the box and, literal security, not just compliance security.
Yeah, exactly. I think for myself, real briefly, is it falls in line with a lot of what you just stated as well, but allowed me to take a step back and ask the question, does proving this make sense for my business, right? Does this matter? Is this, we were hearing KSI, Ethan, I've heard you explain it as KPI, right? It's a measurement against your organization and against the business processes. And so viewing it from that lens really helped me. Ethan, what about you from, what's one misconception that you had to overcome with the 20x process?
One misconception. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Choose your favorite.
But I think the whole reason why they're called key security indicators and not just controls, again, because we're trying to get away from this idea of controls. And the big reason why they sound like key performance indicators is because they are, like what I was speaking to before, they're just key performance indicators, but for your security team. So that's one thing, and then the other big one is just we said it already. It's not lower security. It's just a different way of expressing security. And people think, well, you're going from 300 NIST controls to how many KSIs we have. So smaller number means less secure, right? No, it's not like that. It's not like that at all.
Right. Yeah, I love to hear that. Listen, security still has to be there. You still have to engineer the platform that your environment's running on to be secure. You're not going to be able to just deploy an application and ta-da, you're 20x certified. Doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So, segue into our next section here is talking about preparing for 20x. And again, if you're with us right now, there's some great stuff that we've got for you at the end. We definitely want to get to, and so we're going to get there. Just hang with us. So Tanner, walk us through right here.
Preparing for 20x. Again, I talked about a lot of this already, but build a plan. if where you're at in the Rev 5 process is going to differ depending on who you are. So the key is really getting familiar with things like the balance improvements, your KSIs, and all of the new FedRAMP classes that have been defined. There's a lot of terms out there to get yourself familiar with. We'll have continue to have content coming out, and I know we'll be dropping some links in the chat from our producers as well, as far as like some resources to help you get familiar. But get familiarize yourself with the balance improvements and think which one of these would help me the most. Maybe you don't need any of them, maybe you need all of them. But like prioritize them. Talk with your agency and see what your agency is on board with, because you have to get them to approve it. But yeah, see how you can make the Rev 5 life easier in the meantime. And as a reminder, 20x is not going anywhere, and it will be required that all Rev 5 CSPs transition to 20x in the future. So start building a plan. That is our recommendation for Rev 5 for
Love it.
sure.
So it's really just start thinking about it, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's here. It is going to continue to be here. And so building that transition plan and starting to think about that transition
Yep.
would be the number one thing that we could give you to take away there.
Yeah. Yeah. And on our next slide, we're going to be talking about, if you're new or you're on the fence, if you will, about pursuing FedRAMP 20x. So one thing I want to make very clear: if you are not in the FedRAMP space or you are looking to get in the FedRAMP space, PMO has made it very clear, and we definitely agree with this guidance: do not pursue Rev 5. There's the amount of work that it will take you to get into the Rev 5 space and then to immediately transition into the 20x space is not advisable from a business perspective. I can say that. I know Pete says he doesn't want to give business advice, but I'll give some business advice. So I just would not recommend it. And the PMO that's very clear in a lot of the PMO's guidance. So build a business case. The PMO has done a really great job developing time to market opportunities for CSPs. I mentioned classes earlier. A little bit of context that's important for people to know is those classes go A, B, C, D, and those correspond with pilot being A, low LI SaaS impact level being the B, C being moderate, and D being high. The Class A is a great opportunity for CSPs that their business case isn't very well defined yet, but they want to do a marketing exercise to take existing like SOC 2 security or maybe high trust security or some other external framework and pursue getting listed on the marketplace and saying, hey, I'm considering it. I've got a lot of the baseline security. I just haven't gone through the full FedRAMP process. And then your business will have the opportunity to sell them, to sell the product a little bit more easily and have some skin in the game and proof that you kind of know what you're talking about from a FedRAMP perspective.
Yeah.
It's really Ethan, we've talked about, it's like the evolution of FedRAMP Ready. FedRAMP Ready was really designed to be that in the past. And it eventually kind of ballooned into something it was never meant to be. So the PMO is trying to get back to square one with that and have an opportunity for CSPs to get a marketplace listing without running the full 9 yards.
I love it.
But yeah, so that's building a business case. Really consider FedRAMP Class A would be one of our recommendations, and then evaluating existing readiness is saying how far along is your platform engineering. Don't try to boil the ocean. I know it's a corporate term we love to throw around, but don't boil the ocean and say you have to do everything. Look at your security and say, where is my security gaps first of all, and then after that say, how do I want to prove my security gaps? Is it leveraging a partner or a vendor or somebody like us that can help you design those, or somebody else in the space? Is it saying these KSIs are actually not applicable, so maybe I don't need quite as robust a trust center process because I don't need as many validations as a competitor might need.
Yeah.
Or I might want a bunch more validations in this space because I go above and beyond in this area. It's really taking all these tenets that we've talked about the opportunities that FedRAMP 20x provides.
Let me just pull a
building an
little
overall
thread on
plan.
that.
Yeah.
Let me just pull a little thread on that real quick. So we did a lot of assessments on lots of different types of businesses. And a part of that is that like some businesses are just very simple. Like they don't have Kubernetes, advanced microservices. They're not doing anything crazy. They might just be a VM-based business and they want to sell to a federal agency. That's really like when you look at the ability to have a spectrum of activities for the KSIs, it's for that. Because for the longest time, if you're a small business, you might not be able to compete with a very large, highly funded business, but you might still be able to offer value to an
Hmm.
agency, and they just can't get to you because you're not on the marketplace. So
Yep.
this is supposed to just open up the playing field so that the the businesses get more competitive, and I think competition breeds improvement. So
Absolutely.
Love that, Ethan. That tying it back into that business aspect. This is an opportunity for all of our listeners out there and all of our folks that are with us. And then let me drop this little spoiler alert here that evaluate your existing readiness. Just stick around with us till the end here. We might have a little something for you that might make that a little bit easier. So as we move into the next slide, I'm really excited to start getting into some of these because we're going to touch on a few things that we do have coming up. Number one, preparing for FedRAMP 20x. Listen, we are going to be doing more of these educational webinars, just as we are right now. That is our goal. Again, we've seen one, we've done one, and now we're looking to teach one. That's exactly as I opened up. That's what we're doing with these. But we're also going to be having a cohort, and we have found the beauty in bringing groups together and stepping through this process together is very, very powerful. And so we're going to be having that coming up. We're going to be able to assess your readiness. And as we get to the tail end of the webinar today, you're going to see exactly what we're talking about with that. So moving on to the next slide, and this is what I'm most excited for. And so for our audience and for our viewers out there, if you're looking to be able to take something away today, and that's what we want to leave you with, is what can I start doing right now? Here we are. And so what we have for you here is just a little bit of homework. And so as we go through these, we're going to give you the top 5 things that you can start doing right now within your organization to start paving the way for FedRAMP 20x and preparing your organization. So number one, as we jump into it, let's talk about defining your scope. So Tanner, when it comes to that boundary, I've heard you talk a lot about it. Let's talk about that very briefly, defining your scope, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so defining your scope is really thinking about everything in your business that contributes to the security of your system. You know, examples could be, internal phishing exercises. How does that prove the human firewall is strong, or how does your security training or your background check processes, how can you automatically show that evidence or leverage external frameworks like SOC 2? How can you leverage your SOC 2 framework to show that you're analyzing your supply chain? And your other vendors that you're leveraging as part of securing your system. And then you're doing all the traditional boundary checks. You're checking for encryption inside of your system. You're checking access control. You're checking for logging. How are you triaging alerts? How can you automatically show you've done an incident response test? So yeah, think about all the ways that you could gain credit, like Ethan was saying, for all the good things that you're doing that go above and beyond. And then think about how you can, what else is still going to apply in the system that would have previously.
Yeah, exactly. So 20x is about what actually matters, right?
Hmm.
What's in scope, what's not in scope, what actually needs to be proven. And this is really where the speed is going to come from with 20x. So defining that boundary, as Tanner was mentioning right there, is going to be very, very important. Now, the next step, this is one that I love, is going to be identifying that authorization data sources, right? And so as Michelle was talking about those native services, this is one of the ones that I love. So thinking about the environment and where you're pulling that data from. So where are you pulling it from today? Are you pulling it today? And so are you leveraging, truth sources, as I call them, right? Things like AWS config, as Michelle mentioned, CloudTrail, any security tooling. Where are you getting the answers from, right? And so lay all that out on paper. Define those data sources is going to be very, very important. And so, Michelle, again, uh, just real briefly talking about, leveraging these data sources one more time as being the source of truth within AWS environments.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that I also want to touch on, aside from just all of the services talked about earlier, is really making sure that you're thinking about the well architected framework too as your baseline for
Love
starting
that.
in all of this. So
Hmm.
just don't want to forget about that. And specifically around FedRAMP 20x, there is for those minimum assessment standards, the support for the security pillar within well architected framework. So really looking at that as that prescriptive guidance to help out, as well as AWS Artifact. But really, when we look back to those combined resources I mentioned earlier, like guard duty and config and so on, they're really helping you accomplish those critical objectives, right? And
Yep.
understanding where that's all coming from first taking that assessment of your baseline and your environment, against those requirements, automating that
Mhm.
evidence collection and operationalizing that
Yep.
continuous validation, and then being able to generate that documentation needed to support it. So really
Yeah.
bringing that all together from one single source of truth, right, that you're basing it on, and then making it, um, you know,
Yeah.
as you need it in your environment based on what your requirements are
Yeah.
and how you're operating. So I think
I
those
love that.
are really all supporting factors as the shift from the old way to the new really, and kind of to some of the points earlier too, is really not thinking about this being a disruptive overhaul of what was
Right.
happening, but really a natural evolution of utilizing what you have in those sources
I
of
love
truth
that.
to become
Mhm.
FedRAMP 20x and really move along with that evolution versus staying
Yeah.
stuck in the past.
Exactly. So for our viewers out there today that are again toying with the notion of 20x, listen, you have to know your sources of truth. You have to know where your data is coming from. If you don't know that, we can't move forward. So the next step here for the homework is going to be building simple validation POCs. Right. So once we know those sources of truth, start asking the question: what in my environment today can I validate automatically? Like right now, what can I go code something very simply, right? Grab that low hanging fruit. And hey, I know if I run this command, I could get the output that I need to show to the auditor,
Mhm.
right? Not a document, right? We're not asking you to document it, but validate it, prove it within the environment, leveraging those sources of truth, AWS config, and that other tooling that, again, has to be deployed within the environment to start proving that.
Yep.
So, all right, next one on the list here. What can be continuously proven? So here's the thing. If you can prove it one time with the command, now start wrapping your brain around, can I automate this? Can I set this up on a Lambda and have this run on a schedule or some type of event bridge or something like that that would kick off that would allow us to continually improve or continually prove this data that I'm bringing, data artifact or evidence continuously over and over and over again, because that is the key with 20x as well. It's not proving it one time, it's proving it every time. So,
Mhm.
anything on that, Tanner?
No, yeah, and it's, also realizing where your operational controls contribute to these processes. So, the beauty of the validations, so building those POCs, figuring out what can be continuously proven, is you might not have one validation that can prove a KSI in its entirety, but when you take all of the validations you build for that KSI requirement and put it in a, box together, it builds a great story.
Yep.
So, one validation by itself may not provide a lot of value, but together they're incredible at what they're able to show.
Love it.
Yep.
So, to the last one right here, and this is probably the biggest one, is shifting your mind, right? That mindset shift is really, really important for your organization, right? Again, we've already stated that 20x is here. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to grow. And so, understanding that this is cultural, right? This is going to be a complete shift in the way that FedRAMP is done. And if your team still thinks that, hey, we'll fix this before the audit, right? The days of old, if you will, then you're going to struggle with 20x. 20x is about constantly proving that security. And so the goal becomes that you're not going to fix it before said audit. But the fact is that you're always ready. It goes to that operational, proving the operations within the environment
Mhm.
continuously over and over. So again, there's your 5 key things to be taken away from this. This is your homework, if you will. Take this with you and start working through these and documenting this out. Now, at the end of the day, these are all great, but what we've done here at InfusionPoints is we've actually pulled together a questionnaire. You can do all these things, or you can actually go over to our questionnaire as well. We're going to be dropping a link here in the chat to that. In that chat, if you'll take 3 to 4 minutes, or excuse me, in that questionnaire, if you'll take 3 to 4 minutes, fill out that questionnaire. What it's going to do is going to give you a readiness score. It's going to almost do a readiness assessment for you right there about what you currently have within your environment. It's going to help you answer some questions and provide you a summary as to what's really important. So we've dropped a link in the chat for that. Feel free to go out there and check that out. All right. So as we're moving on, the point in time has come for Q&A. And so let's grab a few questions from the audience here and let's get those answered. All right. So I see one here just as we're going through. I see a question from Jason Tan. What's the impact of 20x on systems that are already traditionally authorized? Does 20x provide any value to those already authorized systems? So Tanner, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So definitely provides a lot of value as it is going to be the requirement moving forward. So the phase transition plan that I was talking about for existing Rev 5 CSPs is, Consolidated Rules 2026 is really going to help establish like the finalized dates from the PMO as to when that transition from 20x, or excuse me, from Rev 5 to 20x will be required before there's things like corrective action plans in mind. But things like the balance improvement requirements and all that to say, it's a good question because Rev 5, it's not necessarily that it provides extra value, it's going to be the requirement to maintain your authorization, which will then transition into a 20x certification. Eventually, that Rev 5 path will dissolve. There won't be 3 PAOs out there doing Rev 5 assessments because the PMO is going to say, we're not accepting it because we don't do Rev 5 anymore. So, yeah, Jason, great question. Absolutely provides a lot of value because it's going to be the requirement in the future. And you can transition as early as you want to. It just, again, build your transition plan, talk with your agency and get something on the books. And then, figure out where your readiness stands.
Awesome. And that segues into another great question that we see here from David Austin asking, when's the first ATO when do we predict that first ATO under 20X? And to answer that, it's already happened. If you go to the FedRAMP marketplace, you'll see InfusionPoints out there, along with a few other organizations as well. So those authorizations or certifications, as you're hearing them now called, they're already out there. We hope to hear any moment now about our moderate as well, as we're have already submitted for that. Another question out there is that I'm seeing here from Jesse. It says, how does FedRAMP 20X help organizations that have no sponsors? This is a great question because we've been talking about the business aspect of this the entire time. With just a few minutes left here, it allows those organizations to make that marketing push, like you were kind of talking about, Tanner, right? Get into the FedRAMP marketplace and then build that case with agencies. And it's the proof. Hey, we can do this. Here's our product. It now adds you to the catalog, if you will. And then if the sponsor comes to you and says, hey, that's great, but we're looking for this level, well, then go ahead and take that next step.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that one thing to call out that's important is the idea of a agency certification versus a program certification. So what the PMO is trying to do with 20X is they're trying to avoid that chicken and egg issue that happened with FedRAMP from an agency sponsorship perspective where I got to get on the marketplace, but I need an agency sponsor to do that. But the agency won't sponsor me because I'm not on the marketplace. And then it's, danged if you do, danged if you don't. So what the PMO has introduced is a program certification up through Class C. So up through that moderate level to where you can get listed on the marketplace, full FedRAMP Class C/moderate certification without an agency sponsor, just by going through the 20X path.
I see one.
It's great. Yeah.
I see one more coming in. We got just a few more minutes. I want to try to hit this one real briefly, and then we're going to close out. But a message here from Chad Hulse that says, is there any overlap between 20X, IL4, and 5 certifications? Tanner, you got like 1 minute.
Yeah. So a lot of that is still up in the air. The PMO has been very particular to say, if you have DoD specific questions, go talk to DISA and DoD. But what we've heard through the industry is that there is currently a lot of analysis happening on the DoD side because, anybody that's familiar with the DoD path, they know that FedRAMP Ready is required for becoming, getting your DISA PA. And part of that is going away because part of FedRAMP 20X transition is they're retiring FedRAMP Ready. So what does that mean for the DoD? We're still getting all that figured out. DoD still figuring that out. But the plan, our understanding is that, DoD is going to have to adapt because the GSAs adapt.
Yep.
So
awesome. Yep. Tanner, thank you so much. And with that, let us close in by stating this. Number one, FedRAMP 20X is here. It's here to stay. And we here in InfusionPoints are looking to help educate each and every person out there that's looking to be in the FedRAMP marketplace on how to obtain 20X. And so for our panelists today, Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. Michelle, thank you so much for providing great insight. And be on the lookout for more of these webinars. We're looking to teach one here at InfusionPoints. So thank y'all.